Welcome back to Tempting Fate Tours. In what is a mystery for the ages, I was going through the photos and videos to notice that all of the final brake assembly photos were after my initial drive to the DMV. One might think that perhaps I drove over using only the handbrake, but of course, that would be silly. In order to get to the master cylinder though, which is mounted directly below the driver's feet, I had to remove the transmission cover, but removing the transmission cover meant removing the floor. Removing the very unusual to find original rubber floor didn't go so well. But I've saved all the pieces, and what I'd really love is if maybe, just maybe, someone out there is watching this and can help us get a proper rubber floor remanufactured. Once the rubber flooring was up, that transmission cover is held on by brass screws. Somehow I managed to get all but one out without stripping the heads off. And the last one, I managed to fit a flat-headed screwdriver into the Phillips head. The brake master, immediately obvious that it was going to be a bear to get this thing out. It's in the floor in this tiny little opening. The clevis pin and the spring and all the parts are just in there in ways that you just can barely reach. Trying to get the brake master out, I moved the pedal and the clevis promptly broke. Of course, I don't have another one. Can't get another one. Certainly not easily. We're just going to have to make do. But also, they have the nuts on this side. There's no easy way to remove this master cylinder. The bolts are held in by the torsion bar, and unless I disassemble the entire front suspension, there's no way I'm getting those bolts out. Having hit a roadblock, move on to the rear brakes. We pulled the adjuster all the way off and found a fair amount of persuasion in the form of a large hammer. Eventually we're able to get the drum off, and I got my first look at a Morse Minor brake setup. When I had ordered parts in advance, there was definitely some confusion over different years of the Minor, but I had shoes, wheel cylinders, and such for all four corners of the car. And the shoes that I had ordered for replacements didn't match the ones that were on the car, and that left me scratching my head. Did I order the wrong shoes? Or were the wrong shoes fitted to the car back in the 60s, but eventually, by taking apart the front brakes, comparing all the parts I had that were new parts with all the old parts, and how everything went together, I was able to figure out. Turns out I had front brake shoes on the rear of the car, and that wasn't a problem. As I took the drum off the front brakes, one of the things that was quite amusing was the friction material was paper thin. They had worn down into the brass rivets, and the brass rivets had marked up the inside of the drum. Added to the list of things that were going to need to be dealt with at a later date, generally when the car got home, going to need to look at those drums and see if we need to have them turned or replaced. Even after I'd spent, I don't know how much time looking at how everything went together, figuring the system out, and getting the parts I'd ordered with the right part of the car so I knew how everything went together, somehow, after all that, I still managed to put the new shoes on backwards for the first time around. So I had to take everything back apart and put it all back together. And then set everything aside so that tomorrow, and hopefully, get the replacement push rod for the brake master cylinder and the other parts to come in on time. We're already at day number 3, and thankfully I was able to get a nice early start. We had new flex hoses, had new wheel cylinders, new shoes. I was able to clean the adjusters up, throw a little grease on them so they weren't entirely dry, and refit the hard lines. Everything was going together perfect until I went to fit the drum, and it won't go on. I think the friction material was simply too thick on the replacement parts. I don't know if you'd call it desperation or ingenuity, but I was able to sand the shoes down and get the drums to fit. We're spoiled by how many parts we can get for British cars and how easily, but oftentimes quality is a bit lacking. This time around, the bleeders that had been supplied didn't fit in the wheel cylinders, which had also been supplied by the same parts vendor. Luckily, I still had the old ones. They were still in good condition. I cleaned them up and they fit in there just perfect. So, problem solved. Let's not worry about it. Now that I've got the rear brakes taken care of and assembled, I've got the front brakes assembled, it's time to deal with the last piece, which is the brake master cylinder. So I started cutting the bolts, and they ate through the reciprocating blade just almost immediately. I got about a quarter of the way through one bonus. Well, running out of daylight again. The next morning, and holy cow, we have parts fresh in from the UK. Got a new clevis, we've got a new actuator rod, we've got the brake master cylinder, all the brake lines go back together, master cylinder gets slapped in. I have to say, I took the designer's name in vain multiple times, whoever designed brake master cylinder and the method that they used to install it, because it's just terrible how you have to reach that brake master cylinder. Put everything back together, and I use my time-tested one-man brake bleeding trick of grabbing something and wedging it between the front of the front seat and the brake pedal after pumping it up, and managed to get the brakes bled, get a good nice pedal feel. Given that my time was up, I got on an airplane and went home and waited for the date of our California Highway Patrol inspection.